Good morning. It's Tony Ann hanging out here under the Bodhi tree, getting a bit of a change of scenery after being summarily booted out of the house. The kids are there and Bodhi is still housebound after his surgery. So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I'm sort of out and about. Hopefully there's not too much background noise so that, so if you can just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, or you're just seeing me lab on here without hearing any sound. So if you can just give me a thumbs up if you're on and you can hear me, that'd be wonderful. So I hope everybody's had a great week. I've decided to come down here, down to the waterfront. Oh, good, thanks. Down to the waterfront. I just love it down here and I always feel like I'm on holidays. So I just came down here for an early morning run and was like, oh, this would be a great place to live stream, but thinking in the air-conditioned comfort of home would be better, but then got the thumbs down on that one. So yeah, I thought, okay, well I'll just come down here then and do it. So just going to get something off my desktop because I think if it's relevant to me, it's probably going to be relevant to others as well. And if you read my my post to it was to my family members, but it's also I think a really good message around Christmas and just what is kind of projected onto kids and probably, you know, maybe even you and me as a child around have you been good and are you getting presents from Santa, and how much that really absolutely just so gives me the shits, because essentially the message is, are you good and are you worthy of receiving goodness in your life? And if not, aka if you've behaved badly, not met my expectations or done something that I didn't really want you to do, then you're bad and I'm going to withdraw love, affection, gifts essentially in the you know, at the time of Christmas. And just noticing what an impact this is having on my daughter and feeling very safe and comfortable to share this message, well and truly well intended on my part, just to say, hey, have you thought about this? And, you know, this is the message that, you know, Sonny's receiving. And as I've said in the title of this post, people get out your umbrella and wait for the holy shitstorm, because it is really fucking incredible, the backlash, I believe, that I've received as a result of that. A gentle reminder that Christmas is about the spirit of giving, that people are always good. Children are always good, even if their behaviour could do with a little bit of a tune-up. Absolutely. Not saying that Sonny is, you know, always well behaved, far from it, oh my God. But, you know, this message of goodness and badness is so toxic, and that message goes straight in and it becomes a part of how we define ourselves then, and not just obviously around Christmas, but around at any time, around whether or not you yourself are a good person because you behave properly and meet expectations, or whether you are a bad person because you don't, essentially. And that is so toxic, and it's really feeling comfortable to be able to share that message and just to kind of open people up to the idea that maybe this is something that needs to be thought about in terms of how much that kind of shapes people and shapes the sense of self. And I tell you what, wait, put out your umbrella, wait for the holy shitstorm, because it certainly came my way. And effectively, you know, I will not change was the message that I received, that, you know, absolutely that this is my stand and this is how I treat people, and if that's not okay, then I will remove love and affection, which is essentially the whole point, conditional love. And, you know, I guess for me it comes back down to that idea of being assertive. And it's such a boring topic seemingly in terms of how it's taught, but it is just something that I so love to talk about because it's so often misunderstood and I guess taught in ways that are all kinds of boring. But if we actually look at assertiveness and really look at it as our capacity to find our voice and express our voice, and really what's deep down most important to us, we all need to be able to be assertive to be able to do that. And the absolute truth is that you can be assertive and you will not necessarily receive assertiveness back. And so when you are assertive and you're speaking your truth, and, you know, and assertiveness is about a win-win, you know, this is how I feel about it, respecting that you have thoughts and feelings as well, but also respecting the fact that you have choices in the matter as to how you'll interpret what I've said. And so absolutely free will here. But really importantly, that I'm not going to censor myself around what I believe to be true. And so, if we look at that and say, well, actually, you can do that, but you're not absolutely guaranteed that that's what you're going to get in return, because what you're saying is effectively going into somebody else's story. And that's certainly what I felt. Like, I'm arguing here with a story, not with reality, not with a consideration for how that might affect me, or how this might be affecting my daughter. And so, really interestingly, when you are assertive and you speak your mind, you are then entering into somebody else's story, and that may or may not be helpful, and that may or may not be assertiveness. You may not receive assertiveness back, basically. And so that it's really, really super key to understand that when you do speak your mind and speak your truth, that you are not necessarily going to get assertiveness back. And assertiveness, again, is about win-win. And so it's so important, though, that you consider that it's not necessarily something that you should then use to censor you. Sure, take it on board, listen to what's been said, but not necessarily that you have done anything wrong by having spoken your truth and spoken your mind, because obviously that is, that's so important. And, until we actually get a real grasp around, what assertiveness really is, which is, again, saying yes to what you want and no to what you don't want. And really that's been the whole theme nearly of this whole week, which is, I guess, going into initially forgiveness, release, let go, and being able to let go of, what's no longer good for you, but really tuning into, and I guess I really ended up getting so much more, stronger with the words, really being about renunciation. That was just something that came through really, really strongly, that more than letting go, just kind of renouncing this to be your reality, just saying, actually, no, unacceptable, no way, no how is that going to be what I tolerate, what I accept, and really entering into that renunciation energy, which is, no, this is not going to happen. And I've had some really wonderful conversations about that this week, and one of them was, well, what does renunciation actually look like? And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about that today, as I have done, I guess, in the writings, and the conversations, but in terms of sharing it with you guys as well. That renunciation, it's really important that if it feels still like anger, then we haven't done the processing around the forgiveness and letting go. Like, that absolutely needs to come first, because I guess if we're looking at that renunciation, that is very, very empowered. It's actually, no, this is not going to be my reality, and it's not necessarily coming from a hurt place anymore. We kind of need to go into the darkness in order to be able to do the releasing. And so we're sort of going into your own reactivity and owning what's been, what you've reacted to, being able to tune into what you've reacted to then kind of forgive the other players in this. Because I guess people walk around the world doing what they do, and they don't know, just like this shitstorm I've received this morning. They don't know necessarily, or I don't know what I'm entering into, and they don't know what they're entering into. We're just sort of all walking around sort of bumping into each other. But, when you have reacted, to be able to own that reaction as your own, and obviously if there are other players in that, there can be a process of forgiveness and letting go and release. And that absolutely needs to come first, kind of releasing, like we said last time, that need to hold them responsible, that need to hold them accountable. And we can say, righto, I'm going to release the need to hold them accountable and responsible and kind of make them pay, even if it's from a distance and something they'll never know about. But to be able to kind of forgive and release and let go. But then we get to that point where we're actually renouncing all aspects of that, which is the situation, the relationship, and everything within inside of you. So your own beliefs, rules, assumptions, which maintain a connection to situations like that one, and situations like it. So that one specifically and ones like it, because you can bet your bottom dollar until you've done that, you will recycle that same drama over and over and over again, absolutely guaranteed. So until something changes within you, which says, I'm going to forgive and release that person and own that this is a drama that I've perpetuated in my life through lack of knowledge, to then release that whole circumstance to say, thank you, I don't need to recycle that situation, that circumstance anymore in my life. I can just let that whole thing go, which includes absolutely some people. It includes absolutely some circumstances, but it absolutely includes everything within inside of you that has maintained that in the first place, which has allowed it to continue, which on some levels invited it in. And by that I mean we do invite things in to be able to let these things come to the surface, that when we're triggered, as much as it feels the last thing like a gift, it absolutely is a gift, because when it's triggered within inside of you, it actually then is an opportunity. It's on the desktop, like I've said before, it's on the desktop for you to be able to work through and release. And that is a gift. It is a gift. And in some ways, as much as you may not want to thank the person or those situations or circumstances that have brought this about, that if we were to see it like that, we can absolutely get into a position where we can release it and let it go, that person's situation, and the whole thing entirely within ourselves that has made it, invited it in, allowed it to stay even. And that's probably the biggest thing. It's not so much whether it happens, it's about whether or not you let it stay, whether you let it stick around is the reality, because shit happens to everybody. Adversity happens to everybody. But whether or not you kind of let it get you down, so you either go into a shame spiral, like it's me, I've done bad, I'm bad, we're really in that shame spiral, or whether we get into that empowered position and we say, well, no, actually, this is not good enough. This is not okay. I do not accept that to be my circumstances in my life. And again, step into that boundary setting, which is assertiveness, and that renunciation, which is I no longer accept that this is going to be my reality. Cut the cord, walk away, move into what is your goodness. And I was reading, I don't think I've posted it, I will post it eventually, something about, if you feel like you're being rejected from a situation, then it's really possibly an invitation into something new. And that's really nice, because so often if you feel rejected, you do go into that shame spiral and you go, oh, I'm bad, I've done bad. To go into that shame spiral, whereas actually an alternative is to go, well, maybe this situation no longer serves me, and that how you've been treated no longer serves you, and maybe it's time to move on, move into something new. And that's where we have growth on growth on growth, and that ever increasing good, because we're taking the information in as feedback, processing out whatever has been triggered for you as your responsibility. And how wonderful is that? That not about blaming yourself, oh, I've invited this in, oh, this is my karma, and all of that sort of self-indulgent kind of self-pity, really, that it's not about that. We can say, okay, well, this situation has come up for a reason, not necessarily to blame yourself for it, but to understand that, this is now your responsibility to make the changes required so that it doesn't have to keep happening. And that may mean setting boundaries around inappropriate people, or it may be setting boundaries around inappropriate work situations or financial situations or whatever. And sometimes that does mean cutting your losses. So often I hear, well, I've invested 5 years or 3 years or 2 years in this relationship. I don't want to cut, I don't want to, we've invested so much, but, it's been really terrible for the last 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. It's like, okay, well, at what point, and this is a question really to ask yourself, at what point do you decide that you've invested enough and it's time to cut your losses? Because so often, again, it's not about the situation, but it's our decision to stay in a toxic situation, which really undoes us. And so it's our capacity then to recognise, oh, I've had a reaction, I'm not feeling great about this. What's the learning here? And this is about that growth mindset, that if you really can start to cultivate that growth mindset, which is adversity happens, shit happens, adversity happens, and then, okay, what can I learn here from this about myself, about others, about the situation, such that then I can move on from this in a really empowered kind of way. And so that often and does mean, again, setting boundaries. It can mean ending relationships, work situations, life situations, whatever it is. It certainly does mean setting, and really importantly, this is what gets missed usually, is those internal boundaries. And I really like to have that real image, strong image of there really being the you inside, the true you, and then all of the other stuff, which, sometimes it's helpful to call it like the inner critic, or sometimes we call it the depressed voice or the anxious voice, whatever it is for you. But it's helpful to really cultivate this idea that there are kind of those, at least two parts. One which we can talk back to, which is I'm not going to treat myself in this way. So say, for example, you have, say, financial circumstances which are not to your liking. And so you can take that on board and, you know, really use it to feed your own sense of unworthiness and your own sense of inadequacy or whatever. Or you can say, well, no, but that's all the voice of the inner critic, the internal critic, which maintains a sense of low self-esteem, low self-worth, all the rest of it. And so we can then start to talk back to that and say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to treat myself that way. I'm not going to use this information in that way specifically. And so I'm just going to see it as a situation that needs to be solved. It's a problem that needs to be solved. And what's the solution? What can I do about that? Which is, again, an internal boundary around how you decide to treat yourself. And when you do that, your situation, financial situation, may not necessarily change immediately, but you will start to make different decisions based on that, because you won't be caught up in that shame spiral. You'll be looking at it in a different way. You may not still feel great about it, but you'll be making empowered decisions based on what is going to get you out of it, as opposed to really being stuck in negativity, rumination, self-blame, self-criticism, all the rest of it. You know, equally, you might say with your weight, you know, if you're trying to lose weight, or you're trying to get fit, or whatever it is, you know, and that, you know, so often people just hate on themselves, you know, all that, you know, smack talk about, you know, to other women and other men and each other about their bodies and their weight and whatever. I think sadly kind of men do get paid out about it a little bit, but, you know, we think that they don't have feelings. But obviously everybody has a self-image and a body image. And so, you know, really importantly, how are you talking to yourself about that? You know, is it the smack talk? Is it the running yourself down because you don't have your ideal body, you know? And so a lot of that change really needs to come from internal. So, you know, even if you do lose the weight or get, you know, super fit or whatever, if the internal talk has not changed, haven't done the internal work, then, you know, you could be, you know, super fit or super skinny or whatever it is, but you'll still have all the internal dialogue, which is that of shaming, basically, self-shaming, self-criticism, running yourself down. Nothing's ever good enough, essentially. And so it's so important that the internal work is done as well, to be able to kind of set boundaries within yourself. So again, you know, looking at that assertiveness, there's just so much to it, really. And that, you know, we could spend probably all day, or I love it so much because it's so important that we're setting boundaries within ourselves, probably first and foremost, that I will not treat myself in that way anymore. I will not say those things to myself anymore. I will not, you know, if I notice the shame spiral, that we're, you know, and the shame spiral being where you are bad, and hence coming back to the Christmas, good Santa, good and bad, but that's the shame spiral. The shame spiral tells you, you know, that behaviour and you are one. So you have, if you've done something bad, you are bad. That is automatically associated. It's automatically connected. And that is not the case. That everybody does bad shit sometimes. You know, certainly, you know, we are not all our higher self all the time. And that's not to be expected. But if you fuse that bad behaviour with badness as yourself, you will really be unstuck and constantly caught in a shame spiral, never really be able to achieve a sense of lasting self-worth and self-esteem, because you are your own worst enemy. And that's what we talk about with the inner critic, that you are the victim and the perpetrator to yourself. And so there's no escape. And that is hell, you know, you're stuck in the prison cell with the worst cellmate ever, which is the inner critic, you know. So if we can set boundaries about that, around that, you know, to be assertive with ourselves, to be assertive with others, then naturally it'll come out. If you're assertive within yourself around how you expect yourself to treat yourself, then that will naturally come out with others. And coming back to where we started, that will naturally happen. And then how other people respond to that is entirely up to them, and will tell you everything about them. So often we get caught up in, well, that says something about me. Oh, I've said the wrong thing. I shouldn't have said it that way. Oh, I should have picked my timing better. Blah, 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 crap, 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 crap. You know, that you cannot predict that, nor can you censor yourself around that. You know, you absolutely need to be yourself. You absolutely need to be able to give yourself permission to do that, provided it's coming from a good place, you know, provided that it's coming from a respectful place. I respect your feelings. I respect my own feelings enough to be able to share this with you. And, you know, if you are standing within your own integrity, saying this is coming from a good place, then really importantly, you know, whatever comes back, again, is coming from their story. And you cannot predict that. It's just, again, it's just so incredible what, the variety of responses that I've had to that one little post. And so it's amazing. And again, what you're doing is putting that into somebody else's story, and then what comes back is telling you all about their story. And it's so important that we get into the habit of saying, oh, this is really interesting information. What's this telling me about them? And so being able to do that, which is, again, a boundary around how you expect yourself to be treated, and then also how you might want to support others basically around that. And so, what kind of space are they coming from? Is that something that you could be offering some help in that scenario? Whether or not they'll accept it is completely up to them. How is it that you're going to be responding to that? And so when you, I guess, set a boundary around that shame spiral, you're in a much better position to remain proactive and empowered, and making that decision to say, well, I'm not going to feel bad about this. I'm coming from a good place, and I'm making that decision I'm not going to feel bad about it because it's the truth. And the truth bombs, I learned that term this week, and I just love it. And I think it's just so true, because sometimes the truth does feel like a little bomb going off. And, sometimes they are truth bombs, and they feel like truth bombs, and they're definitely worthwhile. They're definitely, can feel like a wake-up call. But if you yourself then go into defensiveness, self-protection, shut down, cut off, well, that's really saying something, that there is some real self-love and self-nurturing that needs to go on. Because if you're walking through life with defensiveness and reactivity, then that's a direct evidence that you're not internally taking care of yourself. You're not being loving and kind to yourself, such that we then are ready to kind of react with such, well, let's call it hatefulness, really, and shut downness that says you're not looking after yourself, that says that the internal kindness which you need to be resilient is not actually happening. And so there's just, there's so much in that, really. And, I would hope that I have an opportunity to sort of get to that at some point in terms of reparative conversations. But, again, that's not really up to me, and, done and said what my piece, but we cannot control what others are going to do with what you're putting out there, with what we're putting out there. But it is absolutely important to be true to yourself, and to be able to speak your truth, and to be able to then have an empowered standpoint from which to respond to the shitstorm, which may ensue. It may not, but have your umbrella ready, because you just never know. And you don't want to get any of that on you. So you may as well be prepared with your umbrella, which allows you to be able to have that bit of distance to go, oh, okay, well, wasn't expecting that. Protect yourself from it. So, so I hope you've all had a great week and have been enjoying all of the blogs. And just coming to the blog on Friday around addiction, and I know I've been talking a little bit about shedding various behaviours of habit, and just that internal processing that comes along with that. And I guess this idea that shedding behaviours of habit is something that is easy. We all have a narrative, seemingly, as far as the people that I speak to, and probably even myself, all have this idea that changing behaviours is easy, and you just do it. You just make a decision and it's done. But the reality is that we only ever do what works on some level. And so behaviours of habit serve a purpose, and that they are maintaining or attempting to maintain equilibrium or homeostasis, as I mentioned. And so when you take that away, then we're no longer regulated in the same way. And so then up comes all the shit that particular behaviour of habit has been masking all of this time. And so I've said before around this, giving up coffee business is kicking my ass. And it sounds ridiculous, because to me, coffee has been such a part of my life all my life, and it's been a benign sort of substance just to knock back coffees. But what I realise, and what I've written about, and if you haven't read the Friday blog post around addiction, and I keep it really broad, to me, it's the coffee addiction, which again is so normalised, it's seemingly benign, but I would encourage you just to question whether or not that's the case. But any sort of behaviour of habits, I talk about, television or work or alcohol and other drugs, or, whatever it is, that those behaviours of habit that we're doing to be able to maintain a level of balance. You know, if you take that away, then of course there's going to be shit that comes up for you, and we want to be curious about that. We want to understand it. And I tell you what, for me, that's been quite the rabbit hole, really. And it surprised even me, as it always does, when you kind of oversimplify something and then you go, hey, that's really complex, and that's got really deep, it's really deep-seated. You know, that's got deep roots there. So I guess I would encourage you to think about, you know, if you're looking at changing the behaviour of habit, then, you know, you are going to experience some pushback. You just are, because especially if it's been around for a long time, that it's going to be a journey, it's going to be a road. And for me, I guess in terms of just putting it out there, that changing behaviour can sometimes look like a spiral, and we sort of move forward and we move back and we move forward and we move back and we go round and around. But ultimately we want to, you know, I guess if you're conscious and deliberate and motivated to make that change ultimately, then what we do is we go back and we kind of look at what we could change or what we could tweak in order to be able to remain on that track. So for me, what it has been to go, oh, okay, just going cold turkey, evidently, what a habit, to go cold turkey. It was just really difficult to try and maintain all of my responsibilities, particularly with my children, and not feel like that raw nerve and feel reactive. And so for me just to introduce just a little bit of instant coffee, which is not what I was drinking, and just to go, well, okay, I'm just going to go easy on myself about this and maybe wean myself off, which is always a good idea. Probably what I'd recommend to anybody else but me, because obviously my expectations of myself, and probably for most people, are unrealistic. And so I've just retweaked that and said, okay, maybe just to go back to instant coffee for a couple of weeks just to sort of get back on track, and then go back into cutting that back. And so just, I guess, you know, I could have just said, nah, this is too hard, and go back to my normal habit. Or, you know, with all that I know, to go, well, actually, no, let's reevaluate that, look at what my alternatives are, bit of research, instant coffee, bam, there we go. And then look at reintroducing the change, which is, well, soy chai latte, water, and look at those other options, because, again, you know, just making the full change full out was really just activating a whole lot of stuff and just making it really difficult. And so, yeah, that's okay, because I'm still on track. I've still got my goal in mind. And so sometimes change is a winding path. Sometimes it kind of does feel like we're getting nowhere. And sometimes we just need to kind of persist in the face of no evidence that anything's changing, that anything's making any sort of difference. And that's kind of like a faith option, I guess, to say, well, I know that if I keep taking action, then I'll eventually get there. And that's, you know, so often the case, say, for example, with, say, weight loss or, you know, or saving. You know, sometimes it kind of feels like it's going to take forever and you're never going to get there. But if you kind of know the mechanics behind it, you go, well, I know that, you know, this is kind of how it works, so I'll just keep doing this because I kind of know that's how it works. If I keep doing this, then eventually I'll get there. And so, you know, that idea of being persistent, even in the face of very sort of slow sort of evidence, is the order of the day, to say, well, actually, kind of, if you know the mechanics, then you kind of just keep doing that then and you'll eventually get there. So, yeah, so that addiction, I guess what I would say is if you're looking at a behaviour of habit, you could guess that on some level there is an addiction. And sometimes below that addiction is something else entirely, like I said in the post around, for me, ultimately, the addiction was to overstimulation. And so what was coming up for me was immense boredom. And so I was like, oh, so boring, oh my God. You know, but really, if you look at what boredom is, it's that, you know, this concept of life not being perfect as it is right now and life not being interesting enough as it is right now. That is what boredom is. You know, you're not making the most of the present moment. You're not making the most of what's happening around you right now. And boredom tells you you need something else. You need something to stimulate you, be it coffee, be it television, be it job, sex, work, you know, whatever. Like it's whatever, you know. And so that was what was so interesting, to go, you're just taking the behaviour away, but what's left underneath it is the fodder. That's the bit that you actually need to work through. And so for me, actually recalibrating my nervous system as a non-coffee drinker is a process. And so similarly, to calibrate your nervous system as someone who is alcohol free, you know, you need to regulate overstimulation or or stress and anxiety, because that's often, you know, what alcohol does. It's a depressant on the nervous system, and so that says you're probably revving at quite a high level, and alcohol brings you down. And so you take alcohol away, well, then you've got all this, you know, this arousal that you need to then manage in a different way. And if you don't, well, the default will be alcohol. That's just kind of how we work, because the nervous system gets used to you doing that in a particular way. The nervous system gets used to you regulating yourself in that way, and then all sorts of changes happen within the nervous system, which we know as tolerance, in order to be able to accommodate that. And so you take that away, the brain does take a while to heal from that, to recalibrate, to go, oh shit, now I have to do this all by myself, and that takes time. And some people call that like a detox. You know, yes, detox physically, but actually neurochemically and in terms of the structures of the brain that actually change, you know, that, you know, we have the capacity then to grow those receptor sites, which is again the tolerance. When you drink more coffee, those receptor sites, you know, expand and grow, and then we have, you know, you have to have more coffee to get the same result. And so that takes a while to change, for the brain to go, oh, okay, well, this is not coming in anymore, and I need to be able to kind of function differently, because the goal is homeostasis. The goal is that balance. We have the right amount of stimulation and the right amount of relaxation. And so, and it comes back down to those behaviours. What are you doing to be able to regulate yourself? And so that is where this is sort of a holistic kind of approach, that we look at, yes, changing behaviour, but we absolutely need to look at how specifically does that need to change. It is that, and we can look at thinking as a behaviour. It's something that we do. And so what needs to change there in order to be able to really accommodate the new healthy sort of behaviours that we're trying to invite in, so that we can then actually, I guess, regulate ourselves in a completely different way. And, you know, something then that actually has, as opposed to negative side effects, has positive side effects. So instead of drinking alcohol, you might go for a run. And, you know, then we've got all the good stuff. So we've got fitness, and we've got maybe weight loss, and maybe you've got endorphins pumping through your body, and you've got high vibe and energy. And, well, maybe that's where you stop drinking coffee. Who knows? So, yeah, so just a little, I guess, a little prompt to say, well, actually, behaviour change is, we oversimplify it. We think, well, we'll just do that. And it's not the case. It's not that easy. And if anybody who's tried any sort of change will absolutely know that, and will resonate with that, to go, yeah, I kind of, you know, thought it would be easy, but I'm finding it really hard. And so, you know, that's because it isn't. It is difficult, and it's multifaceted, and it's deep layered. And if you really want to go there into deep healing, then having a framework and a model to be able to draw from, to be able to give yourself the highest chance of success is really what's needed. And so you can stop undermining yourself with misguided attempts, you know, based on simplicity, as opposed to, you know, attempts that are based on a realistic appraisal of what's actually happening for you. So, yeah, so that's the download for today. And I really do hope that you've had a really good week, that perhaps you've been setting some boundaries, perhaps some things have been changing, perhaps you've been doing some renunciation. Again, the renunciation energy is when you've done all of the processing and the work, the forgiveness, the letting go, and then we're just renouncing that, saying, you know, it's coming from an empowered place, just going, no, I do not accept that to be my reality anymore, moving out of it. And so, you know, and maybe and hopefully if you've gotten there, then go you, because that's really where life can change, when you're just renouncing circumstances and situations, just saying no from an empowered position. And if there's anger there, then there's some processing to be done. So I hope you've had a really great week, and we'll be in touch very soon. Okay, see you later.